wherever you are and whatever time you see this video. Today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Spike Cohen, and he's running for vice president position on the Libertarian Party ticket. So welcome to the show, Mr. Mike Cohen, to Scube TV.
Thank you, Srini. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the viewers of Scube TV for tuning in to listen to us talk.
Okay, can you help us out in knowing a little bit more about yourself? I know you started a web designing company and then you moved on to the media. So I really appreciate if you can hear more from you about yourself.
Sure. So I started a web design company back in 1999, right before my 17th birthday. And then 3 years ago, I decided to retire from web design and focus my life full time on libertarianism, on spreading the message of liberty to a public that often hasn't heard our ideas. And so to that end, I became the host of My Fellow Americans, the co-host of the Muddled Waters of Freedom, and the co-owner of Muddled Waters Media. 7 months ago, I decided to run for the Libertarian Party's vice presidential nomination in order to continue that campaign of spreading the message of liberty and to get libertarian wins, not just get libertarians elected into office, but to help change the cultural conversation that's happening in America right now. Right now, most Americans are just hearing from Republicans and Democrats recycling the same failed ideas that got us into the problems that we're facing now. And I wanted to inject the good common sense libertarian ideas that will fix the problems that the Republicans and the Democrats have created. And to that end, I decided to run for the vice presidential nomination. I was nominated back in the end of May to be the Libertarian Party vice presidential candidate, along with my presidential running mate, Joe Jorgensen. And we are running a campaign to show the world that Joe Jorgensen is the next person to be president and is the one who is going to bring common sense solutions to solve the problems that have been created by the Republicans and Democrats.
Very nice. Congratulations on you being nominated for the VP.
Thank you.
Run. And we wish you all the best in the run, actually, for you.
Thank you
Can you also tell, I mean, we've been, as you said rightly, we've been hearing more about Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Everybody, I mean, whenever we talk about the politics, we hear more about these two parties. So we very rarely hear about the Libertarian Party and also the Green Party. And so can you help us out in understanding a little more about the Libertarian Party and the ideologies of the Libertarian Party, please?
Sure, absolutely. So libertarianism is pretty simple. We believe that everyone owns themselves and their lives and their bodies, which means that they also own their labor, and you also own the product of your labor, which is your property. And we believe that when government aggresses against you, when government takes from your life and your body and your labor and your property, that not only is that an inherently wrong and immoral thing, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work from a utilitarian aspect. If I can take from you, Srini, and everyone else that's watching right now, whenever I see fit, I'm not going to be very good with what I have. I'm not going to make good decisions with it because I can just take more from you whenever I see fit. And you and the people listening, you might not be the best stewards of what you have, because you know I can come and take it from you at any moment. And the bad policies of the Republicans and the Democrats in their exclusive control of every lever of power in this country for the past 160 plus years is nothing more than a program whereby they have claimed the authority to take from us whenever they see fit. And it has led to the harmful and inequitable and abusive outcomes that we have come to see as just the status quo. And libertarians are running to end that status quo, and so that everyday Americans can see real benefits from a society that's built not just for a very small, select, powerful few, but for all of us. And so that's what libertarianism is. It is the belief that we should take the power away from the most powerful people who have robbed us of our self-ownership and give it back to the people where it belongs.
So very nice. So what is that? I mean, which is missing in the, let us say, Republican Party. I mean, we compare all three of them. And so what is that? I mean, which is missing in the Republican Party? Why? That's the reason. I mean, you guys are start the Libertarian, and you're running for the Libertarian.
So the same things are missing in the Republican and Democrat parties. They will speak to their respective bases. They've created a division in this country. And the reason they've created this division is to promote a shell game that gives you the illusion of choice. The Republicans and the Democrats are essentially the same party. It doesn't matter which politician on which side you vote for. You get the same thing. You get endless war. You get endless taxation. You get endless debt spending. You get endless people being thrown in prison. You get endless impositions on your day-to-day life for no other reason than to preserve their power and their wealth and their influence and that of their favored cronies. That is the system they've created. Doesn't matter if you vote Republican, doesn't matter if you vote Democrat. If you tend to lean more to the right and the Republicans tell you, oh, we want to limit government, we want to, protect your rights and allow you to keep more of your money. Or if you lean more to the left and so the Democrats are telling you, oh, we want to create a fairer society, we want more justice, and we want you to be able to, have a more affordable life. And then you vote either Republican or Democrat and you get the same thing. Ever worsening outcomes, a constant worsening of your situation, a constant growth in the gap between those who have and those who don't have. And what libertarians propose is completely dismantling what they have built, completely dismantling the system that is built on preserving the power of a relative handful of people, a small group of people that own almost everything. And that has happened as a result of the so-called protections that they have put in place that were put there for no other reason. The only protection it protects their market share. It protects their wealth and their influence. And libertarians propose ending all of that so that American people working together in cooperation and competition will be able to thrive in ways that we've never seen before, and will be able to work together to solve the problems that the Republicans and Democrats have imposed upon them.
Gotcha. So, if you look at the, ideologies of the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party, they are they have few common points, like, small government and less taxes and all those things when they talk on the paper. And if you also look at the Libertarian Party, last few years, they have been nominating, somebody who is an ex-Republican Party, and then bringing them onto the Libertarian Party, and then projecting them as a Libertarian candidate. So, how does it justify the Libertarian Party saying that we are different from the Republican Party when they are getting the people from the Republican Party and then projecting them?
The difference between libertarians and Republicans, and Democrats for that matter, is the good things that Republicans say and the good things that Democrats say, we actually plan to do. We're actually going to do it. We actually have policies that will lead to those things happening. So Republicans will say, for example, we want to reduce the size of government and cut taxes and make you have more money in your wallet. But then you look at their policies, and they're the exact opposite. They're growing every part of government. They are increasing the net taxation rate. Everyone got focused on the Trump tax cuts, but what they didn't look at was that if you factor in the additional tariffs he has added to products that are imported from China and Mexico and Canada and India and other countries, the average net tax increase for the average American, their taxes went up. If you include the tariff, which is just another form of tax, the average American's net tax burden has gone up under Donald Trump. They talk about they're going to reduce the deficit. We're facing the highest deficits that we've ever faced in American history. Donald Trump is on par to spend more money in his first term in office than Barack Obama spent in 2 terms. And Barack Obama previously had easily the highest record for the most amount of spending in by any president. Trump's about to beat Obama in 1 term, and he has all but beaten Obama in deficit spending again in 1 term. So the Republicans may talk about limiting government and making things easier for entrepreneurs and small businesses, but then they do the opposite. And then on the other side, Democrats talk about ending police brutality and ending the wars and ending the war on drugs and lots of things that sound good. And then they continue to just spend more and just try to have more control of your life and engage in more wars and raise the taxes. Because Donald Trump's not an island. Donald Trump and the Republicans have worked with all of the major figures in the Democrat Party while they pretend to fight each other and how much they dislike each other and how different they are. Every single day, they hold hands to continue the ever increasing growth of the government in its size, its scope, its power, and its control of your everyday life. Libertarians propose dismantling that.
Gotcha. So, thank you very much for the inputs on this particular topic. So, is there any government in the world? Thank you. Is there any government in the world which is successful in running the country on the libertarian philosophy or ideology?
I would say one of the ones that's probably closest would be Switzerland. They are a neutral country. They have a fairly robust free market economy, not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they're doing fairly well. And they're basically allowing individuals to largely unmolested be able to live their lives. I mean, they have rules and regulations and things in place, but for the most part, they seem to have a pretty good role of it. And in fact, we've actually proposed having their foreign policy. Joe Jorgensen proposes ending the wars, bringing the troops home, and making America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. The U.S. government has engaged in statecraft and empire building that has done nothing but harm. Obviously, harm to the countries that our government has invaded and bombed and destabilized and bullied, but also harm to us. It has cost us countless trillions of dollars in deficit spending. It has cost us countless, tens of thousands of caskets brought home with American flags draped over them. It has brought home countless people who are alive, but who have PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, all these veterans and active duty troops coming home with all of this damage from the wars that have happened overseas. It has spurred the creation and the recruitment tool of terrorist groups who increasingly hate us because of the blowback from the actions of the U.S. government, meddling in their countries, invading their countries, bombing their countries, terrorizing their countries, and making them want to have us feel some of that same terror here. So we propose ending the wars, bringing the troops home, and allowing the healing to begin.
Good. So if you end the war, ending the war is a good thing, but how do you? You also propose less spend on the military. So do you guys propose? No defense at all, or minimum defense, or how does it? You need to safeguard your country also at the same time when you minimize the government and minimize the spend. If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, so not eliminating defense at all, keeping a sufficient military to protect against aggression. So what we have right now, we are spending close to $1 trillion a year. And many of the military experts are saying it's completely unnecessary. We're spending money, hundreds of billions of dollars a year on defense, on new weapons programs that some of the people on the ground are saying, we don't need these things. This is just another crony, basically a bailout or a boondoggle for defense contractors, for military contractors like Northrop Grumman and Raytheon and Blackwater and Boeing and all of these different contractors to just get more and more and more money from the politicians that they helped put in place. And it's couched under the idea that it's being done for our defense. We aren't being defended by this. It's not helping. It's actually making things more unstable and making things worse. What we have seen historically is that the best way to have friendship with countries is not to bully them and threaten them and destabilize them and bomb them and invade them, but instead to trade with them, to have diplomatic relations with them, to encourage travel between the countries, to encourage friendships between the countries. Look at the relationship that we have with India, that the U.S. has with India, a growing trade relationship. There are still disagreements over different policies, but no one's talking about India and the U.S. going to war. Why? Because we're friends, because we trade. We make trillions of dollars a year trading with each other. No one would dream of us going to war. But we talk about going to war with Iran. Why? Because we have no trade relations with them. We have very little diplomatic relations with them. And why is that? Because the government doesn't want us to have those relations with them. They put sanctions in place in order to stop us from having relations with them so that we have no desire, no reason not to go to war with them. And it's because we want Iran to be one of the board pieces that we play our international chess game with. And it needs to end. It's not helping anyone. It's not helping people over there. It's certainly not helping people over here. It's costing a fortune. It's causing discord and hatred between people who are thousands of miles away from each other for no good reason. And it needs to end. The troops need to come home. We need a sufficient military to protect us against aggression, and that's it. That's what the military is for, not to bomb and destabilize the world as our politicians see fit.
Gotcha. Thanks for your stand on those war and military in the U.S. side. Switching the topic to the COVID-19 pandemic right now, the whole world is struggling with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so what is your view on the current pandemic, and what do you think the current government handled the pandemic situation in the US?
Oh, they handled it terribly. Look, let's look at what happened in the first 2 months. Because a lot of times people get focused on, they'll say, oh, maybe the government should have been more involved. Where did the government fail? Here's what we know. For the first 2 months, 6 to 8 weeks that the pandemic, that COVID-19 was on our shores, was in the United States, it was illegal for doctors to test and treat and contain COVID-19 patients. This is a pathogen. This is a virus that, if left to its own devices, doubles in its spread every 2 days. It doubles if left to its own devices. And during this time, this 6 to 8 weeks, when people were coming into their doctor's offices and saying, Doc, I'm not feeling too good, and I just got back from Wuhan, China, and I'm hearing about this coronavirus thing on TV, and I'm wondering if I have it, the doctors had to tell them, we can't test you for it, so we'll just pretend it's the flu and treat you that way. That's why it spread as bad as it did here. Now, thankfully, there were a handful of doctors. One of them was Dr. Helen Chu, who was at the University of Washington Medical Center in Seattle. She had patients came in. She illegally tested them. She created the test kits, which apparently, if you know how to do such a thing, it's fairly easy to do. She made the test kits. She tested people, and some of them came back positive. And she and a few other doctors who put their Hippocratic oaths above the law went to the CDC and said, it's here. The virus is here. People are being tested positive. The CDC's initial response, the federal government's initial response to being told by doctors on the ground that it was already here, that COVID-19 was here, their initial response was destroy all the test results, tell no one, do not tell those patients they're positive, send them home, do not treat them. That is why it is as bad here as it was. Now, thankfully, those doctors, in an incredible act of civil disobedience, released those results to the public so that we finally knew it was here. But that's why, for so many weeks, we were told, oh yeah, a few people here have it, but it's not a big deal. Thousands of people had it, and they didn't even know because it was illegal to test. Imagine if the government had simply gotten out of the way of the medical professionals on the ground while they try to do their job. Imagine if the government had simply not made it illegal, which, by the way, that's the same thing the Chinese government did initially, which is why it spread as badly as it did. When Chinese people first came out, when Chinese doctors first came out saying there's a new virus and it's way worse than SARS, they were put in jail. So this is an example of when government just, instead of just allowing medical professionals to do their job, they step in and go, whoa, 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 you're not doing it the way we want. And they allow things to go completely out of hand. Now what's happening? Now we're being told we have to stay in our houses, we shouldn't go outside, we shouldn't go visit our families, we shouldn't go to the beach or the park or to a small business because that's dangerous. We should go to Walmart, we should go to Costco, we should go to Target, we should go to big businesses and all huddle together in the buildings because that's safe. That's what we're told. And then we're told if we don't comply and if we don't listen to what they say, they'll put us in jail where we're almost assured to get COVID while we're in there. So the message is very clear from government. If you don't do what we say, we will infect you. That is how government treats us. They impose a problem on us by not letting us treat it back when it could have been contained, and then they use it as an excuse to scare us into compliance with the explicit threat that if we don't listen to them, they'll make sure that we get it. And then while they do that, they tell us all to stay home, they give us $1,200, and then they hand trillions of dollars to banks and Wall Street and airlines and hotel chains and other big businesses while they give us $1,200 and say, stay home forever until further notice. That's the way that government interacts with us. That is the way that Republicans and Democrats interact with us. Under a Jorgensen administration, all of those ridiculous laws and regulations that are preventing the healthcare sector, preventing medical professionals from treating us and from testing us and from being able to contain viruses when they come out, all of those will be gone. The government will no longer put their boot on the neck of the people as they try to solve the problems that we face. The government will allow people to solve these problems and create a situation where they don't end up having to tell everyone that they have to stay inside and that they have to listen to us or we're going to infect them. We completely upend things by removing the bad, centrally planned, arbitrarily defined, and crony-friendly policies of the Republicans and Democrats.
That's a very good theory. I mean, you brought in. I mean, about how the government the intervention is stopping the control of the disease. But I mean, at the same time, if you look at the COVID-19, so I understand. I mean, initially there were issues in handling the way they handled it. But at the same time, if you look at the scale of this particular problem, if you leave it the way, leave it to the people, I don't think they will be able to handle it. I mean, isn't it right? I mean, isn't it true? I mean, like let us say, if you leave the COVID-19 without interfering, I mean, you will not be able to. I mean, get more funding and create more hospitals and get more equipment.
Another perfect example. You're talking about making more hospitals. First of all, I'd like to challenge the what you said. We can't leave it to the people. What is government? It's just people. This is a mindset thing, and I'm not calling you out on this. This is a common mindset among people. We talk about government like it's this great monolith that comes down and is the font of knowledge that pours down its blessings upon us. It's just people. And not only is it just people, it's the worst people. We hate politicians. We hate bureaucrats because we recognize that they don't know what they're doing half the time. And when they do know what they're doing, they often make the wrong decisions. And then we hate the cronies, the very wealthy, well-heeled cronies who come in and leverage the power of those politicians and bureaucrats for their own personal benefit, to retain their own market share, to make sure that they stay on top and keep the rest of us down. And yet then we'll say something like, well, what if we can't leave it to the people? Why would we not leave it to the people? The medical professionals are the ones doing this. The medical professionals are the ones actually dealing with this problem. You mentioned building hospitals. Do you know why we have a shortage of hospitals? Because the federal government passed a law called Certificate of Need laws. A certificate of need law is that any time someone wants to build a new hospital or a new medical center or bring in a new CT scan machine or an MRI machine, they have to ask the municipality that they're building it in, the city or the county that they're building it in, for permission to do it. They have to get a certain number of petitions signed to be able to even get a hearing to potentially build that new hospital. And the cost of doing all of that makes it so that a number of hospitals just aren't built. They just aren't built. And these municipalities aren't saying this needs to be done. It's federal law saying that the municipalities have to go through this ridiculous draconian process of approving a hospital. Why would someone build a hospital if it wasn't needed? So, Srini, this is a perfect example. We are conditioned to believe that we're not going to get hospitals unless they come from government. And yet, it's government that's stopping the hospitals from being built. It's government. We say we need government to lower the cost of our drugs and our pharmaceuticals. And yet it is the patent protections of the government that allow pharmaceutical companies to jack up the pricing of their drugs 100 times or 1,000 times what they used to be, because they have patent protections in place where no one else can make these drugs. That's why something like epinephrine or insulin, things that have been around longer than any of us have been alive, cost 1,000 times more than they used to, because you have a small handful of companies that own the patents and the government is protecting those things. So my question to you, when you say without government, who will do these things? The answer is we will, and we won't have government in the way preventing us from doing it.
That's a good, fair logic to argue no issues. But at the same time, there are if you look at any small business, if you let it be a restaurant or a hospital, see, they start with a good intention, with no doubt about it. Let it be hospital or anything, but without a check, let us say, how are they doing? How are they performing? So, I know I heard you talking about, donating food to the charities or a shelter. That you also wanted the people need permission from the government, the authority. So when you don't check, how do we know, make sure it is safe and it is good, and how do we do those kind of things? I would like to hear, your comments on that.
Well, it's one thing to have, for example, basic government authorities that are checking safety and things like that, but we're going way past that. We're having government tell people whether they're allowed to do anything or not in the first place. It's simple to say, okay, well, government needs to, you have to pass a certain, safety or security test, or, if you're doing a food or drug thing, safety. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying don't test for safety. I'm saying stop preventing people from doing their jobs or building a new hospital. If the hospital's built and it turns out that it's not a safe hospital, okay, go in and find them or, shut the hospital down or whatever. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about them not even letting them start the construction on the hospital in the first place or even get the permit to start the construction on the hospital. So, no, absolutely. If people, if local and state and even federal governments want to have some level of checks to protect the public, that's one thing. But I'm talking about not even letting them do it in the first place. Now, with that said, the greatest check from the public is simply allowing them to have enough options so that they can choose from it. We now know, we have the government making sure that food isn't toxic, but yet we're well past that. We now have websites and things like Yelp and social media where we go past checking if the food's toxic. We tell people if the food tastes good. We tell people if the service there is good, if the lighting's good, if the atmosphere there is nice, if the parking's nice, things that government could never even get involved in. We are able to check because we have options, because the government, for the large part, allows those options to exist. But in something like healthcare or housing or education, where government goes in and greatly restricts our supply to those things, it gives us a dwindling number of choices, which means that's the problem. The problem is that if we don't like the healthcare options we have, if we don't like the education options we have, it's nearly impossible to get new ones because of the sheer number of restrictions that have been put in place on anyone who tries to make something new in those sectors. And that was done intentionally. The reason that they have put those barriers in place is precisely to protect the market share of the big, well-heeled crony companies that are already existing in those markets who don't want new competition. And so in order to prevent you, the innovator, you, the small business owner, you, the entrepreneur, from being able to innovate and be able to create new solutions and disrupt the market and be the next Amazon, the next Walmart, the next Facebook, the next whatever, in order to prevent you from doing that, you're also being restricted in your choices of who you can get to provide the services that you need. And that has become government's main role, is to protect powerful people from you, not just from you trying to compete with them, but from you trying to hold them accountable, from you trying to have different options besides them. The government's role is to protect the powerful from those without power and to take more and more of our wealth and power to give more and more of it to people who do not need more of it. And that is the wages of the bad policies of the Republicans and the Democrats. And that is what Joe Jorgensen proposes to upend and give the power back to the people where it belongs.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for your points on this.
Thank you.
During the same time, during the pandemic and health issues, we have another social topic which has come up, which is like Black Lives Matter. Yes. So I mean, what is that? I mean, your views and what is, at the same time, we hear all lives matter too. But at the same time, I mean, some sections are saying that one term, not only the Black lives, all lives matter. So what is your take on the Black Lives Matter and how should it be addressed?
Well, so there's two things there. One is the whole debate between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. And then there's what Black Lives Matter and other groups like them are opposing and what they're fighting for. I'll delve into this question first about Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. I've been to many Black Lives Matters protests. Black Lives Matters people are not saying that all lives don't matter. What they're saying is that if you look statistically at how Black people and other people of color and other marginalized communities, so Black people, gender and sexual minorities, immigrants, people of various ethnic and religious minorities, they are being treated disproportionately worse than, and the poor as well. They are being treated disproportionately worse than the people who are in power. And so what they are saying is that in order for all lives to truly matter, not just as some catchphrase that we say, but as an actual truth that all lives truly do matter in equal treatment under the law, then Black lives, we have to acknowledge that Black lives matter. That is the purpose of what Black Lives Matter is. It isn't saying only Black lives matter or other lives don't matter or Black lives matter more than other lives. It's saying in order for us to be able to say that all lives matter, we have to acknowledge that Black lives matter and we have to make changes to make it so that those lives are being treated the same way that everyone else's are. And that goes to what they're fighting for. The big things that they're fighting against, right now the biggest thing they're fighting against is police brutality and disproportionate use of government force against communities of color. Now, the biggest way to deal with that is to hold government accountable. So we have a situation that started in the 1950s and 1960s, where the Supreme Court created a doctrine called qualified immunity. And it was basically put in place to allow governments to infringe openly upon the rights of civil rights protesters and anti-war protesters, people protesting against the wars in Vietnam and against the Cold War in general. And so what this did was they created a doctrine which basically said that if government officials, politicians, bureaucrats working for government, the police, anyone working for government, if they infringed upon your rights, if they harmed you in some way, killed you, abused you, assaulted you, robbed you, whatever. But if they themselves, the individual who did this, determined that they were reasonable, that what they did was reasonable and should be expected to be something that they should have done over the course of their duties, then the case would be thrown out and they wouldn't be held accountable. Imagine if you could go to court and you have a murder charge and you go, Your Honor, I know I'm being charged with murder here, but I think what I did was perfectly reasonable. And the judge goes, oh, okay, well, if you think it's reasonable, I'm going to throw the charges out. That's qualified immunity. And what qualified immunity does is it completely upends everything. It incentivizes bad policing. It incentivizes bad actions from government. It punishes good actions. And here's why. Derek Chauvin, the man who killed George Floyd, which is what sparked was the final spark for these protests. Derek Chauvin had 17 other major complaints against him, including complaints from fellow officers and also including wrongful death complaints. He had already murdered other people. And the Minneapolis Police Department, when they looked at Derek Chauvin, they said, this cop's terrible. He's robbing people. He's harming people. He's beating them up. He's killing them. What a terrible cop. But because of qualified immunity, he's not costing us anything. And if we try to get rid of him, if we try to fire him, we're going to have to fight the police unions, and that's going to cost us a fortune. So as a cost-benefit analysis, we'll just have to keep him on, and if he goes too far, then we'll have to, we'll eventually have to remove him. If he's actually charged with a crime, then we can remove him. And that's happening in police departments across this country. It incentivizes, it rewards bad policing because you're not going to be held accountable. And it punishes good policing because if you try to hold one of your fellow officers accountable, nothing's going to happen. And now everyone's going to look at you for holding one of your fellow officers accountable. So there are, we only have a handful of bad apples, but they are spoiling the bunch. And they're spoiling the bunch because those apples aren't being removed. If there are bad apples in a bunch, you get rid of them because they can spoil the other ones. Ending qualified immunity is something that Joe Jorgensen will do. And what it does is it puts the power back in the hands of the people to sue officials when they infringe upon us, when they harm us, when they abuse us, to sue officials if they kill our loved ones or if they abuse our loved ones, and to then turn around that analysis where now the police department say, wait a second, this officer's bad, he's going to cost us a fortune with lawsuits, we have to get rid of him. And the police unions will do the same thing. We have to get rid of the bad cops. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We're also going to end civil asset forfeiture, which is the program whereby the government takes from you, without even putting you on trial first. And if you are found not guilty or the charges are dropped, you have to sue to get your own stuff back, even though it was just proven in court that they never should have taken it to begin with. That program ends immediately. We end the 1033 military surplus program, where the Pentagon is dumping military surplus and the training for that equipment on police departments. This is why we're seeing police increasingly look like, SWAT teams and military forces. They're getting all this equipment, but even worse, they're getting military training. Officers whose job are to go out into our neighborhoods and interact with us are being trained to treat our neighborhoods like the front line in a war and to treat us like potential enemy combatants. And it's changing the mindset. They've been doing this for the better part of a few decades now, and it's getting worse and worse. The police that we were grown up to believe that they're just there to protect us, the police are now there like they're a military force, and they're trained to be a military force. That program will end. We'll end the war on drugs, which has created a situation where it has destroyed people's lives lives. It has led to more addiction. It has given a powerful tool for making money to cartels and other criminal organizations. It has put millions of people in cages that are then used for free prison labor for the benefit of very powerful for-profit prison labor companies that are so powerful and so profitable that they're actually traded on the stock market. We'll end all of that. We will end the system that the Republicans and Democrats have put in place to keep people down, to keep them scared of their police forces, to create a greater and greater divide between the police and the public they're supposed to serve. And we will end all of that so that that healing can begin between the police and the public, so that the bad officers can be removed and the good officers can be rewarded, and we can have freer and safer and healthier lives in our own communities.
It's very nice. I mean, you have articulated the qualified immunity very well. I mean, in every department you have many good people. I mean, there are a few bad apples. I mean, as bringing a bad name to the whole department. I mean, there are police officers who help the community. They help the kids. They help the senior citizens. So there are many good people in the police department without any doubt about it. So thanks for clarifying on that. So switching the topic to the economy and the jobs, those things. I mean, in the US, especially last few, I mean, at least a decade or more. Things are one side, things have been going very well. Like, I mean, economy was going up and many people were getting richer. And but at the same time, I mean, the people are making money, but at the same time, they are not able to buy the things. I mean, the way few years or decades back, they were able to buy with the same job. Yep. And so, I mean, the affordability has gone down. So with these issues, I mean, we see the other movement, the Green Party movement or Bernie Sanders movement, I mean, where people wanted some minimum safety net. I mean, let it be, I mean, healthcare, or let it be the college education, or social security. Those kind of things, I mean, they wanted it. That's the reason people are because they are not able to get on their own. It will be becoming a challenge for them. So, but your party is against those kind of freebies. So, I mean, so how do you, I mean, handle? I mean, but at the same time, if you don't have if you don't give them social safety, bringing up the people to the same level playing field is also a challenge. So we'll not be able to give them the same level playing field because these guys are already at the bottom, and this guys, some of them are on the higher left platform. So it will be challenge for the people at the bottom level to compete with the people in the higher platform. So how do you manage, I mean, these challenges and with your free policy, I mean, free open market policies?
So this is another perfect example, Srini. We have the government creating a problem, and then using the anxiety and the suffering that comes for that problem as an excuse and a pretext to create even more problems. So the reason that Bernie Sanders and other people that are proposing greater social safety nets, the reason why their message is increasingly catching on is because an increasing number of Americans are completely being left behind by this economy. Yes, the stock market is doing fantastically, or at least it was before all of this. The stock market's doing great. The billionaires are doing great. The multimillionaires are doing amazingly. But the people on the bottom, and not just the poorest among us, not just the homeless and the working poor, the middle class, an increasing number of middle class people cannot afford the cost of living. All of these problems, healthcare, education, higher education, social safety nets, all of these things all breed back to the same problem. The cost of living is greatly outstripping what the average American is earning. So their wages are going up like this, while the cost of living is going up like this. And it's just a very simple thing. The longer that goes on, the more and more people can't afford to live on their own, which then opens up for government, that same government that created those conditions in the first place, to turn around and say, oh, we've got this taken care of. We're gonna, put you on social safety net. The social safety net, the welfare state, is an action whereby government has abused people, robbed people, taken their bread, handed them back little crumbs of that bread, and then said, well, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have those crumbs that you have there. No, if it wasn't for them, you wouldn't have had your bread stolen, and you wouldn't need any crumbs. So a perfect example of this, two major things. We could spend the entire 90 minutes or however long I'm slated to be on here talking just about this. But the two major things that are contributing to the economic problems that we are facing are barriers to entry and inflation through the Fed. So here are the barriers to entry. If you are not already wealthy and you want to do something professionally, not just work for someone else, you want to braid hair, you want to cut hair, you want to start a business or a shop, you want to open a store, you want to become a doctor or a lawyer or anything else, government has created a series of barriers and burdens and licenses that you have to comply with and pay for that have nothing to do with protecting the public and have everything to do with making it hard for you to get into that chosen field of work. Why? Again, so that the people that are already established in those sectors don't have to compete with you. And so that while you're trying to get ahead, that they can profit off you in the meantime. Because if the government wasn't giving out loans for people to go to school and underwriting them and then requiring that people pay them off even if they drop out and can't ever even go bankrupt to get out of them, they can prop up their failed public education system. They can prop up their universities who are building these, mega billion-dollar stadiums and everything else because the government is underwriting the cost. They don't have to have a price equilibrium. If those colleges relied only on the actual demand for college and relied on people being able to afford it, they'd have to bring the prices down or they'd not have as many students. That's true of anything. If you own a restaurant or a store and you add a zero to the price of all of your goods and services, so something that was $10 is now $100, no one's going to come into your store. So you have to keep the price at an equilibrium in order to be able to continue to have people at your store. Universities don't have to do that. Governments definitely don't have to do that. They can add whatever the price is, and you have to pay it. It's the law. And any of their preferred cronies that have been put in place, like insurance, like higher education, they can jack up the price to whatever they want to because the government told you had to go to them. So if we remove those barriers, those occupational licensing laws, those burdens to entry, those barriers to entry, that again have nothing to do with protecting the public. We were talking before, if the government wants to inspect people and make sure that they're being safe and protecting people, that's perfectly fine. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about them not even letting them get started in the first place. If we remove those barriers to entry, the average American will be able to actually try to be an entrepreneur, to actually try to start a small business or get together with other people and start a worker-owned co-op or any of the things that are simply not allowed or have such barriers put on them that the average person can't even do it. They can't even afford the compliance. They can't afford the legal costs to try to do it. If we remove those barriers, then it allows them to now disrupt the market and go in and thrive and be able to do better. Now, here's the other problem. The cost of living, the US dollar, the Federal Reserve note, the US dollar that you have in your wallet, in your pocket, in your bank account, that dollar is worth 2 cents on the dollar of what it was worth in 1913 when the Federal Reserve was introduced. Prior to the Federal Reserve, the cost of living went up and down based entirely on supply and demand. Some years, cost of living went up a little bit. Other years, it went down a little bit. When the Federal Reserve was introduced, two things happened. One, we never stopped going to war. The year after the Federal Reserve was introduced, we got into World War I. We've been at war ever since. And two, the cost of living goes up 3 to 10% every single year, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. It never goes down. It always goes up. It always goes up more than what people are making in wages, which is why an increasing number of Americans cannot afford to live. And the reason for that is because government figured out that the American people would never agree to be taxed, to pay for wars and the war on drugs and putting people in cages and militarizing the police force and systemic racism and all the terrible things government does. They knew we would never agree to pay 70 and 80% tax rates to pay for all that. So instead, they have the Federal Reserve print out trillions of dollars every single year and lend that money directly to the federal government in the form of buying treasury bonds, which we then have to pay back. Every day that they buy more treasury bonds is a new 40-year treasury bond with interest that we and our children and their children and their children have to pay off with interest every single day. And not only that, but because they are inflating the money supply without adding any additional value, just inflating the amount of bills that are in the supply, that reduces the value of all of the Federal Reserve notes that you have in your pocket and in your bank account and that you use to buy everything you need to live, what you live off of, your wealth that is stored in this currency that you are forced to use because the federal government has imposed themselves on as a monopoly on the issuance and distribution of currency that they force you to use, in which they have a vested interest in just spending more of and printing out more of so that they can spend on whatever they want without your approval or consent. So not only are they doing a bunch of things in your name that you never agreed to, but they're reducing the value of your currency, which makes the cost of living continue to go up faster than your actual wages. And so what we propose in order to fix these economic problems so that people aren't saying, oh, I can't afford my healthcare. And healthcare is a whole other subject. 75% of the cost of healthcare is just government red tape, Medicare restrictions, Medicaid restrictions, and insurance mandates. You take the government out of it, the healthcare costs go down 75% pretty much almost overnight. But in addition to that, just the general cost of living increase, that goes away when Joe Jorgensen gets rid of those barriers to entry that we were talking about so that people can enter the market, start making more money, start disrupting, start becoming entrepreneurs, start building up their financial legacy for themselves and their families, create the generational wealth that we and our families came over here to build in the first place. And then get rid of the Federal Reserve so that the constant cost of living increases end, so that the government now can't just spend endless money without having to go to the American people and explain why they need to increase taxes, which means they'll be spending a lot less then. It'll also end their crony relationships with all these well-heeled businesses that can just show up to the federal trough and get endless money. And then what happens is your currency can be provided by competing providers who will have a vested interest in giving you the best, most sound, and most valuable currency to use to buy and trade and sell the goods and services that you need. Because instead of them having a vested interest in printing out endless money because they force you to use it, they know that they have a vested interest in giving you the best currency that gains value in over time so that your cost of living goes down over time. Imagine a situation in which you find out every year how much less the cost of living is because your currency is worth that much more. That's what happens when you have choices between currencies. Instead of having a monopoly imposed upon you against your will, which means they can do whatever they want with that currency, now if this currency starts acting up and starts printing out too many and you start losing value, you can switch to another one. That's how it should be. Again, removing the government from the equation. The government's purpose should be just one thing: protect the lives and rights and properties of the people. That's it. Anytime it gets involved in anything else, all it does is it imposes a harmful, centrally planned, arbitrarily defined, and crony-friendly monopoly that imposes harmful, inequitable, and abusive outcomes. And that includes in the economy. So Joe Jorgensen would end all of that and allow the market to do what it does.
It's very nice. I mean, we got your views on the economy and the healthcare. I mean, indirectly you covered, your views on those, how to help revive and then reduce the cost of the healthcare. Thank you. And coming back to the education, there's another topic, core topic, which is, hurting the U.S. citizens' education system. So I know, your party has been talking about, taking out the education department at the federal level and give it back to the citizens and the teachers and the community. So can you talk elaborate a little more about, how you guys how your party wants to revive the education system in the US?
Sure. So when you're saying education, you mean like K through 12, not like university.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we were talking.
Yeah.
That's what I thought you were saying. So the federal government got involved in education in the 1970s. I believe 1973 or 74, the Department of Education was created. And the reason it was created was because they said that the literacy rate was too low and that the federal government needed to get involved so that American students could be smarter. And we have spent something like $2 trillion in that time, and the literacy rate has gone down. This is, again, what happens when a centrally planned authority steps in and imposes a one-size-fits-all design on the entire country, a nation, an incredibly diverse nation on a huge landmass of 350 million people, and says, yeah, this one thing is going to work for all of you. It doesn't. In the best of conditions and intentions, it wouldn't work because there's no way for such a small centrally planned authority to determine what everyone needs. But in the worst of conditions, the conditions we have, what ends up happening, again, is that all they've done is create yet another way for well-heeled, politically connected, powerful people to make money at the federal trough without having to actually provide value to the market. Just show up to their favored politicians and go, hey, I got a great idea for you. Here's some legislation that's really going to help education. Oh, and it's going to make me really, really rich too. But don't worry about all that. It's really going to help education. And more importantly, if you sign it, I'm going to keep donating to your campaign war chest to make sure you keep getting reelected. And the politician goes, that sounds great to me. Oh, this is going to help education. That's great. They don't know what they've signed. Half of them have no idea what they're talking about on anything, and almost none of them know anything about education. But they're just signing what's put in front of them, and it gets passed off to the executive, who he signs it off and hands it off to bureaucrats who are well-heeled and well-connected with those lobbies, and they pass whatever they want to. And then we end up with the bad legislation that we have. We end up with things like No Child Left Behind, which has left tens of millions of children behind, standardized testing that has completely destroyed the public education system. We have a situation where we are spending more per student than any other country on earth, and aren't even in like the top 20 when it comes to educational outcomes. What the Libertarian Party proposes, what Joe Jorgensen proposes, is getting the federal government out of it completely. They have utterly failed. Actually, failed is the wrong word. It has gone exactly how they wanted it to. They wanted it to get worse. They wanted their cronies to benefit from it. And the reason they want it to get worse is because then they can use it as an excuse to continue to get more and more involved. Education's getting worse. The literacy rate's going down. We have to get even more involved. No, they created the problem. Their involvement is why the problem is bad. Joe Jorgensen says, get the federal government out of education, put it back where it belongs, in the states, and more importantly, preferably in those communities who know what they need best, so that the decisions on healthcare or on education are being decided by parents and teachers to the benefit of their children. They are the ones paying for it. All of us as members of our communities and parents and teachers are the ones paying for it anyway. There's not some new entity that's paying for things at the federal level. It's all us paying for it. So why doesn't our money stay in our communities and our states and in our schools where it belongs, with our teachers and for the betterment of parents and their children and on their education? That's what Joe Jorgensen proposes.
Yep. Thank you very much. Another thing is when you talk about the schools and also the community, the other topic is the safety. And at the same time, in America, we have a culture of the freedom of owning the guns, the Second Amendment. So how do you balance between these two? We have seen many schools, school shootings or movie shootings, shootings in the movie theater, mass shootings. So how do you, people say that, because of the gun policies in the US, these things are happening. So is there any balance between the Second Amendment and the safety of the people in the country?
You're absolutely right. It is a problem of gun policy. Look at the places that are getting shot up, that are where the victims of these mass shootings are happening. Schools, malls, movie theaters, government offices, military bases, which a lot of people don't realize. People, when they picture a military base, they think everyone's walking around with guns. They're not. Because of laws in this country, the military, active duty military, when they're on base in the U.S., they're not allowed to carry a weapon. So there's only a handful of people, private security officers in those bases that have weapons. All of the places that are being targeted for mass shootings are places where the shooters know that no one else is going to have a gun. They're going into areas where it's just shooting fish in a barrel. So it is absolutely the anti-gun policies that are leading to these mass shootings, because someone can walk in with a gun and kill a bunch of people knowing that no one is going to be there who is able to actually shoot back and stop them. You don't see mass shootings at gun rights rallies. Back in February, there was this huge rally for gun rights in Virginia, in Richmond, Virginia. Something like 15,000 people showed up. 15 to 20,000 people showed up. They were heavily armed. It looked like, some kind of huge gun convention. The whole city. Do you know how many people were killed that day?
No.
Not one person died that day. Do you know what also didn't happen? We've been watching these unarmed protests against police brutality, and we watch the police come in and shoot them with pepper spray and tear gas and beat them and lock them up. None of that happened in Virginia with the gun rights rally either. Because what idiot would fire tear gas at a bunch of armed people? And what we've seen more recently at some of these rallies is Black Panthers and Boogaloo Boys have showed up with guns and gone to the front of the protests against police brutality with their guns, and now suddenly the police are being nice to the protesters. The reason that we have a right to keep and bear arms in this country is to create a healthy balance of power between the government and the people. That is the purpose. When we talk about gun violence, any conversation on gun violence that doesn't center around the fact that an unarmed official of the government is 6 times more likely to kill someone than a member of the general public, a civilian with a gun. Any conversation that doesn't focus on the fact that it is government with guns who is killing people, who is disproportionately killing people, is a disingenuous conversation. When an organization, when the government, who is bombing people around the world, who has nuclear weapons that can destroy entire sections of the planet and render them unlivable for thousands of years, when that government is telling you that you shouldn't be able to have a rifle, there's a problem. Especially when we know that the areas that have the strictest gun control are also the areas that have the highest levels of gun violence. And of course they do, because the only people there who have guns are the police, who can use them basically however they want with qualified immunity, and criminals who don't care what the gun laws are. And that's the problem we face. When you tell peaceful, law-abiding people that they cannot own a weapon for their self-defense, then they're now a sitting duck. We've seen it with these protests. So the protesters have gone, they're unarmed, they're protesting here, the police descend upon them and then brutalize them. And then what they also do is they leave the entire rest of the city open to looters. And because those cities tend to have very strict gun control laws, no one can stop the looters. No one can stop the people going in and destroying businesses and homes and setting buildings on fire, because the public is disarmed and they're unable to effectively stop them. And we've seen again where Black Panthers and Boogaloo Boys have shown up to these areas armed and gotten on the rooftops of these buildings and said, we're not going to let you loot here. Suddenly the looting ends. We don't have a gun problem. We have a problem where powerful people want to disarm a public who wants to be able to defend themselves. The problem is a centrally planned, arbitrarily defined idea of who should and who shouldn't own weapons. One that's deeply, deeply rooted in racism. The very first gun control laws in this country were written to stop freed slaves from being able to own weapons to defend themselves against the Ku Klux Klan. And every single gun law in this country since has been disproportionately enforced against communities of color, immigrants, and other marginalized communities. The average Black American is something like 3 times more likely to be charged with a gun crime, even though the average white American is 2 times more likely, or 2 or 3 times more likely, to own a weapon. So white people own the weapons and Black people get arrested for owning weapons. That is what gun control is. Gun control is yet another series of laws that are put in place for powerful people who have armed security and secret service and, the best protection money can buy, to tell the rest of us that we shouldn't be able to have a firearm to protect ourselves from those who would harm us and who do not care what the laws are. Joe Jorgensen would end all gun control laws. Joe Jorgensen would end the ATF. All gun laws are an infringement on your right to have a proper balance of power between you and those who would try to harm you.
Gotcha. Thank you. Due to the time, I know you have many other points to discuss. We'll take another time some other day, and then we will come back on those things. One last question for the day today is:
Sure.
Do you see a path? Your most of the points. Some of the points are very reasonable and good to hear. But when it comes to the politics and the elections, how far is the Libertarian Party to win the elections and be in the White House? How far is there a path to the White House or the presidency right now?
So we believe that if we can get on the debate stage between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, when we take these 2 men who can barely form a coherent sentence between the 2 of them, 2 men who are personifications and emblematic of all of the problems that we face. Joe Biden, a career politician who is behind every single bad policy we are looking at. He's been in there for 40, 50 years, and he's been passing these bad legislation all that time. And Donald Trump, who is a career-long, lifetime crony wealthy crony who has leveraged the power of government to make himself wealthy at the expense of others, and who for the past few years has been in charge of it and has continued those abuses and inequitable outcomes of government. Those two people, and in between them you put Jo Jorgensen, a brilliant self-made entrepreneur, a woman who is ready to lead from day one, a senior lecturer who is able to take complex ideas and break them down in ways that connect with everyday Americans. Someone who will be able to break down point by point and case by case how Joe Biden and Donald Trump and the Republican and Democrat parties have created the problems that we face, and how common sense libertarian solutions are the ways out of those problems and the solutions to those problems. I think it'll be very, very simple. I think the American people will realize that there is only one viable choice up there, that all of the stuff they've been told that you have to vote Democrat or the Republican will win, or you have to vote Republican or the Democrat will win, they'll realize that's all nonsense, that Jo Jorgensen is the only one up there who is the viable choice for the next president of the United States. And then once that happens, I think the election is ours to we'll win it. I think we'll win that election. And in order to be able to qualify to get on the debate stage, we have to get 15% or more in, I think, 5 opinion polls by just after Labor Day. So we have this summer to get that 15% in the polls. And we're already feeling good about that. In the last election cycle, Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, our last libertarian candidates for president and vice president, they got 13% in one poll, and they got 11% in another poll. So they came very, very close to qualifying to get on the debate stage. What's happened in the last 4 years? Americans distrust their government more than they ever have. Americans distrust the Democrats and the Republicans more than they ever have. And the major media that does everything they can to choke out third options has less and less of a share of the market. And social media, where we have much more of a prevalence and a prominence, has that much more of a share. We believe those things will combine to close the gap to get Jo Jorgensen the 15% that she needs, so that we can start getting in these debates. And once she's on that debate stage, it's over. We're going to win it because the American people are going to realize that they've been played for fools by the Republicans and Democrats, and that there is a good, viable option who is the way forward for this country and for this people, for our people, the American people. And so with your help and your support, we believe that we'll be able to get that 15%, and we believe we'll be able to win this election and turn the things around for America so that we can live in a freer before.
Thank you very much for your views. Do you have any message to the listeners or the people who tune in right now?
Sure, absolutely. If you like anything that you've heard today, you want to hear more, I invite you to go to joj2020.com. That's JOJ2020.com. If you'd like to be a volunteer, we'd love to have you on our volunteer team. There's a form there. And there's also, if you would like to make a contribution, we'd greatly appreciate it. There's a big donate button there, and you can make a donation. Jo Jorgensen and I are fighting for a world in which the wars have ended, the healing has begun, police brutality has ended, the American people are able to thrive again, the wealthy, well-heeled cronies are put back in their place where they belong, and the power has given back to us, the people, the American people, where it belongs, where we are free to associate as we wish, where we are free and open to as much trade and migration as we see fit, where we can build businesses and build a financial legacy for ourselves and our loved ones, where we can have more control of our education choices for ourselves and for our children, where we can have greater choices and greater access and lower costs in healthcare, where our lives are freer and safer and healthier and happier, and where the future for our children is greater than anything that the Republicans and the Democrats have even thought to promise you, much less be able to deliver. That is what Jo Jorgensen and I are fighting for every single day. And with your help and your support, that is exactly what we will do in the White House. And I appreciate your time. Thank you, Srini.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spike Cohen, and we wish you all the best in the elections. You and Jo Jorgensen. Thank you.
That means a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a nice rest of the day. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.